This weekend, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness exploded into theaters and made almost $500 million, more than doubling what the previous film made in its opening weekend. But the previous film wasn't actually the first Doctor Strange film to come out.
No way!
The first one actually came out in 1978 and was a TV movie. So today we're gonna stop and rank all 5 Doctor Strange movies, one of them unofficial, from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your ranking of the Doctor Strange films that you've seen, and did you even know that these other Doctor Strange films existed? I'd love to hear your take on it, and let's get started. In last place, Doctor Strange 1978. Now, if you don't know what this is, it's a TV movie that was intended as a pilot for a potential TV show. In the late 1970s, CBS had a big hit with the Incredible Hulk TV show. Then they tried to repeat that with the Spider-Man show that had significantly less success. And then they tried it with Doctor Strange, which was even less successful than Spider-Man. And having seen it now, I understand why. It's not very good.
Bogus.
Now, superficially speaking, as you can imagine, with a 45-year-old TV movie, the special effects aren't very good, and they're way too backloaded. The whole first hour of this essentially plays like a procedural set at a hospital. And then the back half, you do get the special effects, but they're obviously not very good. But more importantly, this just isn't a good adaptation of Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange in this isn't a surgeon whose hands get injured and he seeks out some way to fix his hands. No, he's a psychiatrist and ends up with a patient that's been infected with some magic and he's trying to help her. And it turns out Doctor Strange's dad was tied to the sanctum. And like I said, the first hour plays like a medical procedural, where you're having like doctors debate what the best course of action is with this patient. And then in the back half, you start to get the magic stuff. But as you can imagine, it's not very interesting. Doctor Strange is kind of a passive character in this. He doesn't have a character arc. He's not very compelling, in which case you're left with a story that's not very engaging and special effects that aren't eye candy whatsoever. They're kind of funny to watch in the year 2022, but overall, this is just a boring film. Now, the one point of interest is that the evil sorceress in this is played by Jessica Walter, who was the mother in Arrested Development. Number 4, Dr. Mordrid, Master of the Unknown. As you can tell from the title, this is an unofficial Doctor Strange film. One of the 2 directors held an option for Doctor Strange, started out developing to make a Doctor Strange film, but before they could go into production, their license expired. So instead of just abandoning the project, they just kind of switched out a few names, changed a couple details so they wouldn't get sued, and then essentially made an unofficial Doctor Strange film.
Are you serious?
And as soon as you watch it, you can see all the ways in which it's very much a Doctor Strange film, except they can't use any official names or anything like that. The lead character, Dr. Mordred, is played by Jeffrey Combs, who is famous for playing 1,000 characters on Star Trek, as well as being the star of Reanimator. And then he did a ton of B movies, including this one right here. And then our main villain is played by Brian Thompson, who's one of those kind of familiar character actors that played a lot of villains, such as being in this film here. Now, I think this is better than Doctor Strange 1978, but this is still not a good movie. It's only 74 minutes long, ultra low budget, and so the story is very thin, the special effects are very cheap, but I think there's more happens in this than happens in Doctor Strange 1978. As cheap as the special effects are, they're better than the ones at least in the 1978 TV movie. There's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex bone fight at the end of the movie. So there's a few things that don't look good, but at least they're kind of entertaining, kind of engaging. But this is like an example of ultra low budget genre filmmaking from the early 90s. And as someone that watched a lot of these low budget genre films that were basically direct to video in the early 90s, there's a certain campy charm and nostalgia to it for me. if you didn't grow up watching those movies, you won't have that same thing. The director of this also directed this movie I used to watch called Robot Wars. And so it's not good. It's mildly more interesting and entertaining for me than the 78 film. In third place, Doctor Strange 2007, and this is an animated direct-to-video Doctor Strange film, and it's pretty good. It tells a fairly straightforward version of the Doctor Strange narrative where he's a surgeon that is an unbelievable egomaniac whose hands get jacked up, and thus he seeks out a way to cure his hands, and in the process becomes a sorcerer and starts battling these evil realms. And you have all the classic Doctor Strange allies, villains thrown into the mix. There's quite a few similarities to the 2016 film, but a more streamlined narrative and a different kind of main villain and story arc to it, but there are quite a few similarities. But if you like direct-to-video animated comic book adaptations, this is absolutely one that you should check out. It has 4 directors. One of them is Jay Olivia, who went on to direct like literally 20 DC animated films over the last decade, and he's kind of one of the primary directors of the universe that they had, the continuity they had running over the last decade. So if you're a fan of like the DC animated films, you see a lot of that in here with the way this is kind of plays out. So a solid Doctor Strange origin story with a character arc, villains, magic. You know, there's only so much they can do with the budget that they have for a direct-to-video animated film, so there's not quite as much kind of eye candy and spectacle as you'd kind of like. Even in animation, to do trippy, weird, crazy stuff is still very expensive. So there's limitations on it, but absolutely worth checking out if you're a Doctor Strange fan or a fan of kind of the animated comic book movies that have been coming out recently. Our runner-up, Doctor Strange 2016, his introduction in the MCU. And I find this to be one of the most frustrating films in the entire MCU because the things that it does right, it does really, really well, and it is really cool and memorable. But when you get to one of the most fundamental elements, kind of the story, this is the movie to me where it just feels the most like they're taking this complex mythology, just kind of squishing it into their blockbuster template that they use for all of their origin stories. So on the positive side, this movie has the best visuals and coolest special effects in the entire MCU. And there's a lot of criticism of modern comic book movies for just being big, gigantic CGI fests. And if anything, this movie has more CGI than any of them, in certain senses. But it's artistic CGI. It's stuff that we haven't seen before on this level. It takes kind of these trippy world-bending images from Inception and Dark City and cranks it up to this whole other level. Other images play like a kaleidoscope as an action sequence, which should be nonsense, but they do it in a way that it's actually exciting, thrilling, and interesting. Likewise, other ones play like these Escher drawings that have logic that defies reality and they bend back into each other in strange ways, except once again as an action sequence that makes sense where you can follow what's happening. And then just even when it comes to wizards and sorcerers throwing blasts at each other, they figured out how to make those more exciting than anything in the entire Harry Potter franchise. But then our main villain has the classic MCU villain problem of just being underdeveloped. Of whether you're talking Dormammu is just kind of this force that's out there that we know is a threat, or Mads Mikkelsen as our guy that's right there in our face as the true believer in Dormammu. It's just underdeveloped. The only thing that makes him memorable is the actor himself has a good screen presence, but his personality, his motivation, it just falls flat. And it just feels like we're having origin, just little moments where we kind of tease what our villain's up to, origin, and then dropped into the middle of all this action so we can have a third act. And so on a story level, it holds the movie back.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
It's important to give us this awesome, so we get Doctor Strange, understand the rules of this world, but I just wish the narrative itself matched the spellbinding visuals. But in first place, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and this is a movie that is just splitting audiences. Some people are absolutely loving it, and a lot of people are saying this is like bottom 3, bottom 5 MCU films. And I think somewhat at the core of that is kind of expectations. Some of us, like myself, are just really excited that we're getting a horror film in the MCU and that they let Raimi off the leash to actually be Sam Raimi.
Groovy.
And then other people were just really underwhelmed, whether at the lack of cameos, that there wasn't as much Multiverse Madness as you'd expect, or just in general, the story feeling a little bit thin and inconsequential. I enjoyed what the movie gave me both times I watched it. There's some flaws, there's some missed opportunities, there's some ways in which I think that needed maybe 10, maybe 15 more minutes to flesh out a couple plot points, as well as maybe put a little bit more Multiverse Madness in there. But I love the fact that Sam Raimi got to get weird with an MCU film. I love the fact that this is a movie that I can't take my kids to, or yet. I didn't take my kids to them, and then my wife really didn't like it because it was a horror film. And that this wasn't Spider-Man Sam Raimi, this was Evil Dead 2 Sam Raimi.
Groovy.
And if you've seen Evil Dead 2, there's so many little references to that movie all throughout, where their eyes popping out, the way that lights bend, the way that it does kind of the trippy images, the talking demon things trying to get Zombie Strange at the end, pulled straight out of Evil Dead 2 and dropped into the MCU. The meshing of things that I love that I never knew that I needed or that I wanted. So for me, this is a movie that it has its flaws. I totally get why this movie is not for everyone. And some of that is exactly why I love it. It's a polarizing film. They took some chances. They took some risks. They went out there. They made a spicy food MCU film. And I appreciate that. Wish maybe a little bit of better writing, tighten some things. Absolutely. But what they gave me at the same time, I'm glad that we got it. So it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like it, check out my ranking of the MCU and DCU right over there. Check out my ranking of all 58 Marvel movies right down there, where I talk about all the smaller ones, the stuff like Captain America 1990, the disasters, the great ones, all that fun stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.